Il va y avoir la diffusion d'un film qui traite de certains matériels à caractère pornographique. Donc nous préférons vous en avertir de façon la plus explicite possible.
Yeah. I'm going to explain it again in English. I really don't want anyone here who's didn't know what they were coming for, yeah? First of all, I suck at this. I get obviously fairly nervous. And secondly, I don't think you need to see this. If you don't have an interest in the subject, it gets contentious. And on one hand, I worry about sounding dangerous, you know, like I'm full of myself. And on the other hand, I just worry about pissing off people who don't need to fucking be here. So it's so bad, you know, my own neuroses, that I want to thank some people here, but I don't know whether to do it. Because people complain, and I sound full of myself, like I'm a fucking egoist, but then they get in trouble too. I've had like, I don't know, so many fucking books pulled. You can't sell fewer copies than me. And yet they still get in trouble. So just please, you know, don't, if you don't, do you guys know what the fuck I do? You know? It's just, I'm not here to be provocative. And I really do want to say thank you to the Pompidou, first of all, for like putting up with this shit. And also Dennis Cooper for, you know, see, I feel like I'm blaming him. I really appreciate his interest and his kindness. And Pierre Dort is the reason I'm here. He asked, and so, sorry. Je suis désolé. Okay. So I'm going to show these slides of my archives that are just basically newspaper clippings I've put over things, and I'm going to try and read this as quickly as I can. And you have little prayer books there, so follow along. Oh, and then I should mention that I'm going to show a movie afterwards, which if you're not irritated or bored enough by then, it'll be a little different thing, okay? A finer definition of pornography is an act, an applicable idea that exists between identification and indulgence. As a conversation, it's an apology. More literally, it's a building. Men alone in appealing groups don't make themselves less lonely. Mid-level desperation doesn't last long enough. Like aesthetics and the news, pornography requires smaller personal definition. It's too serious, too perpetual to be reduced to relief, joy, torment, nature. Divestiture merely slows the quick subjective monologue working hardest to destroy objective worry. According to Genet and Sartre and Genet, I'm from Chicago, and Sartre and Genet via Lang, there's two fantasies at work while one masturbates. The jagoff becomes the viewer and the subject all at once, all at one time. Hope that uncontrollable thoughts can crash and attack, and the choral reality that as many names as I can burn into a single focus, chosen beforehand, can be imprecised again. Conceptually, empathy is located to be exploded personally. Respect and compromise skinned forward a priori. Decisions are cheap, tolerance is sexually dismissed or sexually stupidly snide. As such, I wouldn't think that the slides I'm showing at this side and speed are secondary to my rambling. And I realize my questionably private tautology belies any explanation as transparent, judicious fumble. The employable definition of dignity, as allowed by internecine autonomies, never extends quite past defensive ploy. stalled consistently all over, only ever cute vulnerables. Voila. I do this is still more important than anything else, far less personally contentious or edifying. It'd only be rehab to say that the subject chose me. My interest in these newspaper clippings and media reports inspired less and less interest in journalistic detail research and more repulsive fascination with reductive imagery and cruder imaginary specifics, which is how intensely necessary it was to the men like me that crowded over the floors of adult bookstores. I do want to extend it, fully understand, and enjoy the hardly blank stare one pretends or hopes to have. This is proof on one side, evidence on the other, over-worried on each. Move an interest to a taste to a history. You don't lose yourself in fantasy, you don't lose yourself at all. Your baby isn't here anymore, you should talk about it, poor dear. I tell myself, telling you. The space between my description and the potential audience is where I've lived my entire life. The audience I've created for myself is antagonistic. This isn't without reason. It may well be paranoid, not just self-important. In fact, I'm absolutely aware of and profoundly bothered by the centrality of the personalized language, a mild form of autism where I might needlessly write down circumspect details and motives until the obsession alone creates experience. In the space between what I do, write, and the warnings that suggest you're not especially interested is a space between how and why I seek to explain myself and repeat. Add to that another space between what is easy and what is worth the effort. Too much work to be impulsive, too much work to say it's only a job, kind of like sex. Yeah. The highly exciting, never fucking ending abyss between obscenity, legal, and purience, personal. Also a sexually slimy history to a rigidly human, still sexual responsibility. Writing is the only form that pulls the space tighter. That's my personal intention. All of this would still be my foraging. Placing news clippings on a wall in a gallery instead of my pocket starts the half-postmodern misunderstanding that artists and the emotionally needful could see it in full as another artist speaking on overwhelming pain, bravely declaring his own guilt and willingness to change, or your duty to see injustice more selfishly. Imagine that the totality of these clippings could drag down the personalized sensibilities of the daily uncaring reader and slogged-up family. The breakdowns at the side, the vulgar disappreciation of wretched gossip wives and armchair vampires, out of context forgotten, into context vulgar, and hurtful, unsympathetic, unhelpful, and then wrong and silly, adolescent and introspective. Not one fucking case in there of incest. You look backwards and see that my interest was slightly more degenerate than the new apologies. Currently confused revelations and prospective groundbreaking first responder sympathy. There's more than just the book between me and the reader, just like there's more between me and the book. Writing creates realities. It's like all fucking life up there. So many of the obsessions, tastes, little cocksucking details that I try and make sense of, which to me is essentially what writing is, changes and mutates before it hits paper. Further, I'm aware that my opinions are oftentimes clouded by meager circumstance and various other prejudices, which again is why they're committed to paper. There isn't one universal truth that I'm trying to elucidate. I'm not trying to convince others that I'm right or know how to live or that they're plainly wrong. Though I'm fucking sure of it, frankly. I think there is more to be had, and I hope my work is rigorous enough to nail it in context and taste. I don't think art is a conversation between the reader and the creator. It's an intensely selfish obsession in a personal internal dialogue, just exactly like experience. Art needs to be honest to the artist and judge backward from that point of need. It's exciting to see. I don't excuse idiots just because their art is as honest as their stupidity. Similarly, I don't discount liars as readily as those who might only be looking for honesty. There's only one art, no other life, no less chafed by contradiction. Those who don't do the work, don't pay attention, shouldn't ask grimy questions later. I've always thought that no matter what I write, no matter that it is always about sex, the fact that I was using pinnable names, because there are real names up there, you know, real people. in quotes because you don't know the people, and then everyone wants to tell you how they suffered alike. That makes the word truly exist. It legitimized the use of the word true, ruined the zeitgeist to qualify acts as mere or positioned, and made the appreciation of most everyone else's work quaint. Very often the facts were wrong, the placement was exactly right, and since I got most of my information far further than secondhand, the facts never fucking mattered to real anything anyway. The little wonders mattered before the news was splashed over them, and I was only ever trying to get them to matter more. A true pedophile, I always thought. I'm sure that I really do love all of them. I want so much for these little poor fucked names all the time. I so desperately want to see these black and white paper reproductions as vividly ripped apart and rat protected as every fucking mouth out there constantly barks back at me. I know why I pick the ones I do. I know who gives them to me. I understand how chaste they are and why, and I wish it worked, and when it does, even more. As a result, I find myself with decades and memories of brief reportage but central artful faces. Danny Bridges' Chicago trash mother screaming over tears in the alley near the dumpster her hustling boy was discovered dropped. Result being then, I've stopped listening to those who only imagine language needs to be broken apart and played with to delineate the exact same fucking emotions. I know what child pornography is because I know what the appeal is. Hopefully, can separate the offer from the draw and weigh out the professionals and phonies who rescript words to compassion and their more immediate sense of what a tool you most likely are. I'm not tortured by the thoughts or the common difficulty in expression. I've done best to keep these thoughts as real as words only. The first mistake, thinking words need a physical component. The second mistake, assuming that anything not physical, not pragmatic, is spiritual, ineffable, or metaphysical. In this way, what I do, everything, can seem less than and guarded. All of this doesn't require such a small amount of understanding from the observer to have to penetrate it physically. Language is smashed to its inadequacies and inequities in courts and legal tests. Not in clever, creative, imperfect sales. There's another space. This one being the two-tiered psychological definition of treatable pedophilia, being any poor dear who suffers from persistent and recurrent thoughts concerning the sexual desire towards children. The worth of the condition lies directly between nag and experience, as if one experiences what one desires, raped children to a wet, stupid kiss that lasts forever. Anything else that happens after the thought, psychologically speaking, is suffering from something other than pedophilia. Sociopathy, malignant narcissism, convenient lucky fucking trauma. I need to explain myself, and I swear I already have. And these explanations don't sound desperate enough, or too obvious, too thin. I can tell you why it's children in these clippings. And my imaginary therapist cum foil will tell me what a little nature in you means, a little charm and patience and satisfaction, given luckily forward as an eventually extinguished promise. That sex is more natural than violence, and we need to split the two into legal and troll, monster and owner, fiend and griever. My doctors allow for a right to sex and its desire and insist their condescension isn't as insulting as their promise is. I can make myself miss them too. I can't fucking wait to get rid of it, as you do with pornography, which is not an analogy. This shit that gets called my archives has never been precious, which, as an insult towards and a definition of the people that are named and cheaply, quickly described in astounding numbers but not types within, seems essential to what I'm missing in the now obligatory social sense. Every clipping has a name. Parables won't work. I've represented them here and before with aggression, with insult, carried from one booth to another like a scrounging anything cocksucker. The pretense is context that can't reflect purity, but purity is impossible, not even chivalrous. I know this from artists, not floor wipers and wife hiders, cheap strung-out youth and old fat lonelies. Exciting, excoriating, and expansive, but not illuminating. It is pejorative when realized as next best. Lionel Manns, Antoine D'Agata, Andrea Dworkin, Lou Reed, Dennis, don't require me to finish their work for them. I'm not bringing my own tired filth to their work and can't find quite the necessary dearth that I do there than here, where I spend the entirety of my time hallucinating if lucky. Still, I can't brag healthfully that I haven't kept them, but I have made them into something else, something I probably shouldn't have, something that I shouldn't have had to. I've separated the voices from the faces, I've compared the cases, the motives keep becoming mine rather than theirs. I've placed them end to end and re-released them, paginated and compiled, and even better, not drawn out, the quiet themes that centralize the sexless nature of the words when trawled with pity and concern. I've seen what I can say about their worth and mimic the part where they become real and overwhelming, but it is more important to me and easy, frankly, not to let that happen after it doesn't. I'm not presenting a collage, contentious or surprising. I don't care if you miss something small. The aesthetics come now from time and persistence and recurrence, which again is the definition of pedophilia. Intrepid predisposition, another one. This, I hope, is what I am, that none of this has succeeded on its own. I look all around for these photos, other photos that remind me of only more formative, still central, plain fucking photos. These pictures of newsworthy children have almost entirely come from parents and relatives handing them over to cops and press. The headlines alone often work just as well, sadly. Proof is backless. I want a book that belonged to a man that correctly decided that sex is too frightening, too ugly, too cruel, never not revolting, never good enough, and progressively, if allowed to stop anywhere in taste or obsession or sensation, just clinically depressing. He hasn't talked himself out. He is weak, passive, consistently terrified, and because he's been so timidly careful over what little he uses and looks for, sometimes seems to understand that anything else better than this one turgid, emotionally cloying picture is impossible. These images are all about kids attacked by men who couldn't, most likely wouldn't, control themselves for a few more important moments. Sex is central, not children. Not that I want to deny the focus. I know what shelves and price groupings to avoid by now. Booths with signs that limit entry by age and gender, and if you're lucky, price and experience, like Rue Saint-Denis. Created for this absolutely base understanding of the briefest, prurient settle. I've taken, for more than an expository or dialectic example, these clippings, and stuck these photos of smiles, not pictures of smiles being raped necessarily, into adult sexual situations, where children and even thoughts about children are not allowed. For whatever sickness, I thought my kids belonged there. But it's my name on the axe, my mistakes, my joy in what is found directly focused and wanting and miserable on what little I know has happened. The ones that aren't sanctioned apart and officially proscribed. The ones that the runts above me allow and shrug their shoulders piteously, if not derogatively, are the same fucking phonies that own a despicable luck. And yet I agree that it's a mistake. Every single clipping does this to their unreal, tiresome, safest best. They, which they are not, do not exist without me. I'd prefer to answer that this is what happens while I masturbate, in public. That all of this has been created secondhand to what I only wanted to watch for 5 minutes of yanking. A moment where I recognized myself, as if that recognition was the tertiary plus. Pictures of children being barely forced to lay compliant, needy man of enough age difference to suggest better intentions than irresponsible, primitive disarticulation. Run through a sedentary brain that stares at pretty, pasty children, stripped of fucking knot, and worthless sexual loss. Ideally, I'd like the child's words. This is impossible. The child has nothing. No words, no stories, no result, no fantasy blurred life to excuse yet. I tend to pick the younger ones. It's a homosexual work. Every single clipping and photo background is my bore into old men masturbating onto themselves, loosing themselves onto others. Add them all up, and I haven't picked one sensible argument in favor of sexual expression or unique sexual constitutions because I have yet to see one. These were compiled from print periods that kept to a pretense of news over self-celebrity opinion. The information was harder to get and the facts less amplified and ambitious, though never more reliable. As my years went on and my focus never switched, I tended to put the specious and worthlessly verifiable facts to the side with little worry or consequence. I'd prefer, perhaps, that the context isn't mine. I prefer to imagine, to keep the context theirs. I'd like to keep this away from having it stapled onto a wall and have it considered as my comment on how the news has changed and damaged, somehow explicably, the precise thoughts that are meant to be disseminated through these collected, clipped, hardly precious prizes. Maybe there's something better to do. They are current, still constant. It is, in fact, impossible for me to argue otherwise. Bruised slightly by abject confession, less responsible than reductive, I can't think of a single good reason to feel noble. Like when you're alone, and not wasting precious time by choice, like jerking off. I have the fucking library. I tape it off TV and I scrawl her name on the side and keep it. Still, I wrote her baby's name, and its mother, father, fucking lawyer, among the more insignificant, have in fact complained that my appropriation of its name was wrong and illegal. She's the one I have on the screen. Reduce the interest of pornographic impulse to a fact. Facts that deny release to create a longer collection of decades over memories. First, they shouldn't have had their names in the paper. And every fucking day since. The consistency of her name and his gropes is not highlighted, but completely, perfectly created by a taste for allowances made well over my head. Acoustic separation, negative externality, the laws that seek to conclusively identify the principle of harm and the sovereignty of dignity. Economic and legislative concepts created to shorthand obscenity to moral autonomy. I do actually think these pictures should be here, not in some art museum that has the bad taste to pander to a generally lazy or pleasant public. Play out one by one, after all, and then again, while I talk about what I've done ever since my arrest. And more importantly, since the very first time I saw what either I wanted to see or didn't fucking know how really terrible it was, but at least you have some proof in legalese, because there's court records. In fact, that not only did I see it, but that I went looking for it, no matter what I say. I won't accept that the search took over as the obsession, the same way as I don't see the wider work they've done as merely wanting to while away every night away from their noisy daughters and wives. This is better and closer to what they get, or what they say they want instead. Voila. So, if you're not bored enough, excited enough. I'm going to show this film, yeah? And the film is just some kind poor person. The film is really just TV edits from TV, yeah? But it sort of moves, and I tried to take the children's voices away from them. So there's a tendency to see it as sort of American vulgarity. God knows why you'd get that idea. But it's less a comment on the news and more a comment on the thoughts that sort of go on and on and on. So merci beaucoup. I'm going to go have a cigarette. Thank you.